Hi guys, this is Nick. I wanted to talk about one of my gear related um, problems or adventures, adventures in shooting open. Um, this is going to be one of the longer gear related videos I've done. So just kind of bear with me here if I say anything stupid or whatever. Um, so what I wanted to talk about was open gun ejection or raised gun ejection, whatever you want to talk about with that, right? So a little bit of backstory. Ejection on my gun's never been super great, but about, geez, what, 9 months ago, I had a lot of problems consistently with ejection. Uh, the thing about open gun ejection is that you have an optic on the top, and that optic sits right over the ejection port. And so what that means is, in order to get the gun to eject, you have to tune it to kick cases out to the right side of the gun. If they don't, like if you have a traditional 1911 or 2011, it likes to kick cases out kind of like up to the right. And that's fine. But when you have an optic mount in the way, if the cases come right up, then they tend to bounce right down into the ejection port and you get a jam. I have a clear gun here, you can see. My gun worked pretty well for a while, but I started to get consistent problems. Um, I would get stovepipes, cases kind of mashed up against the barrel hood here, between the barrel hood and the breech face, and the brass would be all messed up. But the problem, I say consistent problems, but the problems didn't pop up consistently enough for me to be able to diagnose what was going on. And what I mean by that is I would try and work the problem, and replace one thing at a time. So I would start with my magazines. My magazines were tuned already, but I would give them a tune up. Check the feed lips, adjust them a little bit if I had to. But then I would go out and shoot the gun, and I would shoot 200 rounds, and I would have no problems. But then I would take it to the match, and I would get 6 stovepipes. So it was very frustrating. But I started with that. I tuned my mags, and then figured I'd look at the extractor. And so, I tuned up the extractor, bought a new extractor, tried that out, and I actually really like this extractor, but it works great. But that didn't fix the problems. And so finally what I looked at was the ejector. This little thingy right there. I bought a new ejector. The one that comes with, or that came with this gun anyway. It's basically a short little kind of standard 1911 ejector. And I tuned it, right? So I found a guide for tuning your ejector, and what I did is I worked on the tip with my file, and I got it to work a little better, but it was so short that I didn't feel the ejection was great, and I was still having problems. So I bought an extended ejector. And let me grab my Elite takedown tool here. And the very nice paper clip already bent into shape. These guns don't have a bushing. It's more like kind of like a bull barreled 1911. So you have to hold the slide back on the paper clip to keep the guide rod compressed, and then you can pop out the slide stop like so, and then the slide comes off. So take out my guide rod here. You see, basically you just keep it compressed. Take that barrel from what I wanted to look at here is the frame, right? So this is a little dirty, but this is my extended ejector. I had to take the tip in a little bit. They give you an awful lot of material to work with. This guy here, as you can see. I profiled the tip on my own. A lot of 1911 parts are kind of oversized to account for parts tolerances, so you usually have to fit stuff if you buy it. So I fit it, and it actually works great. Or it did work great, I should say. For about 8 months. But, I mean, what happened was my gun worked 100% for a long time, at least mechanically 100%. I would have occasional ammo problems, you know, as we all do. But that was really infrequent for me. Very infrequent jams, which is good. You want your gun to run 100%. But then I went to Area 1 in Utah last week, right? And gun worked 100% until the very last shot that I fired on the second day. My gun jammed. I had a stovepipe. And, you know, it was like the last shot on the last stage of the last day. So I didn't really think too much about it. But the next day, I had nothing but problems. The gun was clean. I cleaned it after every match. And that includes days on majors. So I cleaned it every day. It wasn't parts breakage or anything like that. I was having ejection problems again. And they had a function bay, so I went over and I checked it, and it was exactly the same problem. Exactly the same. I would have cases stick up out of the ejection port, like classic stovepipe. I would have cases stick up here in between the barrel hood and the breech face. And amusingly, this is the first time I've ever had a malfunction like this, but I had a case eject and go back in backwards, so the case mouth was actually against the breech face. But I looked, it was on a standard station where I looked and it was backwards, and I was like trying to poke it out. I was like, oh man, really backwards? Backwards? Oh, really backwards? Totally frustrating. But I knew what the problem was this time. And the problem is I probably need to tune the ejector up again, because it's not kicking cases consistently out to the side. What happens is, and you can see my mount, there's a little bit of blast here from firing, but this stuff here, these are all brass kisses. So what happens is most of the cases come out to the right. I have pretty nice ejection, pretty positive, but maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 15 cases will come up, hit the scope mount here, and then most of the time those cases bounce downwards, but every once in a while they'll get caught by the slide or pushed into place, and you get a stovepipe, and it's extremely frustrating. But it's happening a lot, which means that probably my ejector, I mean, open guns are pretty violent. My gun's 38 Super, which is not quite as bad as a 9, but I think, you know, what happens to me is the tip of the ejector gets peened over time, and it kind of loses its shape, at least the specific kind of profile you want to kick cases out to the right. I pretty much have the traditional Seymour setup for an open gun, which is what you call an upright. The optic sits flat above the bore. You will see occasionally, you know, if you watch match videos or whatever, if you shoot matches and watch the open shooters, you'll see people that have Seymours, but they're sideways, what you would call like a 90-degree mount. And you'll see people with Seymours that are like tilted to the right or tilted to the left. They call those 45-degree mounts, or whatever you want to call it, right? You'll see people with small optics or Seymours like mounted like very much forwards, very much backwards. It's basically all due to ejection. Now they have some other benefits, like if you turn the Seymour sideways, it'll sit closer to the slide, and you know, if you have problems finding the dot on the draw, that can help you out. but like the primary benefit is ejection. And I mean, when you see people asking about sideways mounts, what's the chief complaint, right? Well, you can fix your ejection problems with the sideways mount, but you didn't really fix it, right? You still have that problem, that inconsistent ejection. And I mean, I understand that argument, I guess, but the primary thing for me is I've shot guns with 90s, and the thing for me is when you bring the gun up in front of your face, if you have a 90, the optic takes up a large portion of your view on the left. And that tends to obscure your vision on the left. And I mean, it did for me. This is like, I'm not saying this out of theory, that's kind of how it worked for me. I'm sure I could get used to it in practice, but it didn't feel like it was great to me when I tried it. And the other thing is you have your windage here on the right-hand side of the Seymour, so if you put it on the right, it's kind of hard to zero it, at least from what I understand. So I don't really want to mess with a 90. I like pistol dots. I have all kinds of pistol dots, and what I've seen recently is people moving towards smaller dots, and so that's what I want to try. I want to get rid of the Seymour. Now the problem with the Seymour that causes this, you're shooting the gun in cycles, it looks like this. So this is where the case would pop out. But as you can see, the butt of the optic still handily covers the ejection port. So that's where your problem comes from. That's why the cases need to come out to the right. So what I would like to do is switch optics. And so what I have here is I have a Leopold Deltapoint Pro, which is a small pistol dot. Fairly typical form factor for dots these days. The Seymour is a product of the 80s, as you can see. They're very reliable because they're very simple, but they're very large. We have a modern dot here. This is a Deltapoint Pro, 2.5 MOA. I really like it so far, but I'd like to have one on my open gun. And the primary thing that I'm hoping for here, I have a Chile mount, Deltapoint Pro mount, is, if I can show you, it'll sit something like this. And you can see it's less than half the size of the Seymour, right? But if you look at it here, the ejection port is uncovered. Looks something like this. So I'm hoping that'll fix my ejection problems. But what I'm going to do is take this Seymour off. I've actually already started, which is why these screws look a little loose. I have to use red Loctite to keep this on the gun. A lot of people use blue. I have to use red. If I use blue, the screws walk out and they fall out. So I already got my heat gun out, trusty heat gun here, and I broke the red Loctite. So I'm going to take them off. So I'm just going to take this whole thing out. Yeah, these screws are all okay. Okay, there we go. So here's our Seymour. I'm probably going to put this on my rifle, on my PCC. I think that'd be a good place for it, but I'll make another video about that maybe, because I think that'll be a fun project. Right now I have like an aim point on there and I don't really like it. But let's see. So we have our holes here. We could probably clean that up. Okay. And so looks like I managed to get most of the Loctite out of there. Should be okay. But, let's see. These screws already have a little bit of blue Loctite on them. So that should work pretty well. I like blue Loctite for my mounting screws, so attaching the optic to the mount. And I have to use red for the frame to mount fit. There we go. That's just snug. I'll probably torque it later just to make sure that I have the right amount of torque, but I'm going to torque wrench out. So there's our Deltapoint Pro mounted. What that'll look like, something like this. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. Okay. The zero on these is pretty repeatable. Like, I've taken my Seymour off quite a few times. When I add this back on, I don't have to mess with re-zeroing it or anything. So if I take this off and on even after I get it zeroed, it should be okay. So probably go over these with my torque wrench too once I put the Loctite on them. But we just want to get it on the gun here. Okay, there we go. So it looks something like this. Let's see, we'll probably, oops, see if you can see that on the camera. Well, here's the optic as it is mounted. But, you know, since every gun is not the same, since every mount is not the same, and since every screw is not the same, when you attach a mount like this, it'll come with some screws, right? But they're not usually the right depth. So these are actually too long, just slightly. So what I'll have to do is basically grind these so that they're flush with the inside of the frame so that I don't get any dragging. So we'll put this back together here. Nope. Ah, there we go. It's a little too tight with those screws. Yep, I can feel some definite resistance there from those screw heads. Yeah, doesn't go all the way back. Okay, it should be enough though to look at it. It's tight. Okay, there we go. So if I were to run it like this, the gun would not function because the screw heads are impeding the travel of the slide there. So I'll have to grind those down, make sure it works. But this is our gun. So this is what we want right here. Totally free and clear ejection port, right? Perfect. I like it. So what we'll do is take it and zero it and see if we can you know, hit anything with it, see how it works. But yeah, I like it. Okay.
If you're finished, unload and show clear. If clear, hammer down and holster.